The time has finally come. Everybody, welcome to 31 on 31 2019. And thank you to everybody that has tagged along with us and joined in with raising the excitement all year long as me and Brian and CP have teased you and tantalized you and dangled that carrot over your head with which franchises we are going to be ranking in this year's 31 on 31. And if you can't tell by the title or the thumbnail, we're doing Chucky, Texas Chainsaw, Scream, Evil Dead, The Collector, and Psycho. So, going to be a very huge, very interesting, and amongst the three of us, very different ranking of these 31 films. And something to keep in mind, not only for my video, but for all three of our rankings, is that this stuff is subjective, guys. These are 31 films that there might not be another person on this earth that has the exact same ranking as me or the exact same ranking as you, and you should not watch these videos hoping to see the same exact thoughts as yours. That's the beauty of being a horror fan. That's the beauty of being a film fan in general, is that we all get something different out of these movies. And no matter how solidified you might think some of these movies are, ranked worst to best from 31 all the way up to 1, we all have different experiences with them. We all have different attachments to them. We've seen them in different points of our lives. Each of these films have impacted us in certain ways, and certain films have not. So just watch it, enjoy the list for what it is. Don't be a dickhead in the comment section trying to tell us that we're wrong. This is our list. Post yours in the comments below. And I've already mentioned their names, but I want to make sure and let you guys know that the other two guys in Autop Stream are doing 31 on 31 as well. So check the video description below, or you can check your subscription feed if you're already subscribed to the channel. Brian Lomax Movie Talk released his earlier this morning. Willis Greedia released his just a couple of hours ago. So both of those channels are also going to have a ranking just like mine, but wildly different than mine. So watch this, then go over to their channel, see how their thoughts and their ranking differs from mine. And if you feel froggy, make your own 31 on 31 video and join in on the fun. And be sure to give us some links, some snapshots if you're getting merchandise like this. Let us know how many of you are joining in with us this year, and maybe more of you will join in with us next year. What franchises will that be? Well, enough fucking around. Time to light this firecracker and kick this bitch off with number 31, the bottom of the barrel, the worst of the worst of the worst of all of these franchises. And those of you that have been fans or subscribers of mine for a while are probably telling yourself, I know exactly what it is. I knew this walking in before I even clicked on this video. I knew what 31 was going to be, and you'd be right. Seed of Chucky is number 31. Now, I'll be honest, I did debate for a little while between 31 and 30 because they are the worst and the bottom of the barrel for very different reasons. But this one of all of these films is the one that offends me the most, the one that angers me the most, the one that I actually wish I could wipe from existence because of what it has done to one of my favorite slasher franchises. Seed of Chucky is an absolutely disaster of a sequel. It destroys everything that I think Bride of Chucky built up very well. It turns this entire franchise into a joke. It's way too meta. The humor that they do go for is terrible. You got a fucking Britney Spears cameo joke in there, for God's sakes.
Son of a bitch!
Glenn and Glenda, what the hell is that? Jennifer Tilly being like this breaking the fourth wall character. Jesus Christ, I could go on for hours about how disastrous this movie is. No, sorry, Seed of Chucky, this is where you're staying. 31, that's what you get. Number 30, the one that almost was 31, because I do think that it is less rewatchable, for whatever that's worth, than Seed of Chucky, and that is Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation. The only thing that edged this out over Seed of Chucky being how terrible this movie is that I enjoy the fact that this is the one time you get to see Matthew McConaughey go so wildly off the rails, and it doesn't offend me quite as much because this is a movie that I can never watch again and just be fine with it. It doesn't necessarily destroy the legacy of Texas Chainsaw. It's done that its own a few times. But The Next Generation, my God, a terrible movie. It's just a weird direction. You've got Leatherface as like this transvestite direction thing going on now where she's like, he or she is dressed up as a girl at one point. I know that they have elements of that in the first Texas Chainsaw, but it's a really weird push that they went for in this one, and they don't really even explain why. All the other characters, the acting in general is terrible. I mean, you got Renee Zellweger, you got Matthew McConaughey, future Oscar winners, and you're like, whoa, what were they doing here? This is one of those movies that actors like to stricken from the record. I think they were even gonna do a Shout Factory with their faces on the artwork cover, and they had them removed because they got their lawyers involved, said, don't put my face on that fucking movie. Number 30. Next Generation. Just above that at 29 is going to be Texas Chainsaw 3D. Now, while this movie is a little bit more entertainingly bad, like I can watch it and kind of enjoy it for how stupid it is in certain spots, it's still not very good, and it's definitely deserving of this spot. You have, yet again, another reboot, yet again, another timeline shift in the Texas Chainsaw franchise. We get like one every 2 movies in this franchise, going back to be the true sequel to the original. And the timeline gets all fucked up. You know, this was written by the guy who did Jason Goes to Hell, and from what Adam Marcus, and from what I can tell, from what I've heard, his script really got altered a lot from the studio. So, though we do hear that sometimes as an easy way for writers to get out of the blame card, it probably happened here because things are so wildly different from beginning to end. The timeline gets all fucked up to where you have scenes that continue right off of the original and a baby is there, and then they fast forward to modern times and she's only like 20 years old. So you're going, how the fuck does that work? Because people are carrying around cell phones. I don't know if this was intended to be like somewhere in the 90s or late 80s, or if it was just, who knows? That's annoying enough, but beyond that, it's just a generic horror film. It's just random ass people. You got fucking one of the rappers in here, what's his name, Trey Songz, that can't act for shit. He just comes in because he's a recognizable name you can throw on the poster. Remember my rule about music artists and horror films? Yeah, it's here. Not really interesting 3D, just a gimmick, just something else to charge a little bit extra in the theater for. Leatherface, not one of my favorite performances of Leatherface. They do this weird thing where they kind of twist it on its head and make him like the anti-hero at the end. You get even the characters beyond that, like Clint Eastwood's son. There's a lot of things in this movie that you're either really on board for it or you were really not. Like I said, entertainingly bad, but bad. 29. Number 28 for me is going to be the 1998 Psycho remake. Now, I will say this movie is a better quality film than quite a few of the movies above it. Unfortunately, I just think it's an absolute pointless existence, and I will never watch it again because I can just watch the original. So that's why it gets bumped all the way down here, because even though some of the movies above it might be worse movies, I'll give them more credit for at least not just being a copy and paste version of another film. I don't give credit for that. So Psycho 98, good things about it, honestly. You get some good modern filmmaking. Gus Van Sant's a very good director. You get some good casting. I really like Julianne Moore. I really like Viggo Mortensen in their roles. And I actually even prefer William H. Macy in the role of Harbogast. Now, Vince Vaughn, horribly miscast, definitely inferior to what Anthony Perkins brought. I don't think the movie serves nearly as well with a lot of the shots in color than it did in black and white. And it's just copy and paste the same exact story. So all the nice little classic, ingenious, iconic twists and turns that this movie takes, you see coming a mile away because it's literally frame for frame with the exception of a masturbation scene and Anne Heche's butt crack. The same exact movie when Alfred Hitchcock directed it. So there you go. Pointless existence drops it all the way down here to 28. 27 is the second time that Don Mancini broke my heart in about a million pieces, and that is Cult of Chucky. After bringing us Chucky fans back from the depths of hell that was Seed of Chucky, he gave us a really good Curse of Chucky that you will see much higher on this list. And we all had our renewed faith in this franchise, our renewed faith in Don Mancini. And even though some people did like this movie, a lot of Chucky fans, I would be bold enough to say the majority of us, saw Cult and went, why are you doing this again? What was he trying to do with this movie? Is there some cool gore and some cool kills? Sure. One of them's recycled from Bride of Chucky, but nonetheless, there's some other pretty cool kills. I don't think that Brad Dourif and his performance and his writing is anywhere near as good in this movie as it is in the other ones. Even Seed of Chucky, that's the one thing I'll give, is that Chucky's still pretty much Chucky in that movie. The story itself with multiple Chuckies and Chucky being able to basically embody anyone and anything with just by saying 4 or 5 words now kind of negates the entire story and tension and struggle of this entire franchise and just makes it a bit of a joke that he hasn't been able to do this since the beginning. Where it leaves things off at the end, how the fuck are you gonna follow that in a follow-up movie or a TV series that apparently is gonna happen at some point? So many decisions in this, like bringing back Alex Vincent, that could have been great, and they waste it. They make him an idiot. His entire plan, moronic. Jennifer Tilly, as defensive as she gets over the real Chucky, her performance in this film is embarrassing. If you're gonna be that defensive of something, at least fucking try, Jennifer. Cult of Chucky. Fuck you. 27. Number 26 is going to be Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 Leatherface. Now this one is probably the most forgettable of all of the Leatherface movies. You know, there's worse ones on this list, obviously, but this one is the one that I struggle to remember the plot of the most. I remember it just being the most bland and the most paint by numbers and the most forgettable, where you just have insert a couple of people that go into whacked out town, they meet a few people, and apparently everybody is in this little Sawyer family. You get Viggo Mortensen in a role where he just seems way too good looking to be a part of this whacked out family. Leatherface, his makeup, like his look, is probably one of my least favorites in this. He's bulkier, but just, I don't know, something about his look doesn't really work for me. There's a badass chainsaw. You get Ken Faree in one part, that's kind of cool. But you know, there's even a trap at one point kind of where they kill a guy by like a Rube Goldberg machine that was interesting. But beyond that, it's just the most bland, uninspired Texas Chainsaw stuff in the entire franchise, so that's why it lands here. Number 25, from here on out, are movies that I would say are decent to good to great. Not really anything overly offensive from here on out. Number 25 is Psycho 4: The Beginning. This is the direct-to-TV fourth film in the Anthony Perkins era of Psycho films. I believe it debuted on Showtime. It's half prequel, half sequel. You got the kid from E.T. playing the younger version of Norman Bates, and kind of an origin story of sorts that shows more of his relationship between him and his mother and how that all went. You get the modern day sequel storyline with Anthony Perkins standing around on a telephone talking to a radio DJ about how he wants to kill his wife because his wife is pregnant and he's afraid that his son might have the madness that he had and that his mom clearly had. Decent movie, honestly. It's not as bad as you would expect when you hear Psycho 4 direct-to-TV and all that other shit that just seems like red flags galore. It's decent enough. I don't care for the prequel stuff so much. I don't really care for the E.T. guy, I can't think of his name right now, as a performance as Norman Bates. I certainly like Olivia Hussey in a certain kind of twisted way, but she's also very over the top in some scenes, so that's kind of a mixed thing. The Anthony Perkins stuff, that side of the storyline I really like, but it's also just told with him standing around the phone, so it's not exactly exciting. So decent enough story-wise. I think it's a good place to end his character, and it does end on a note that I think is a nice way to see Norman Bates go out, but definitely not one of the most rewatchable Psycho films, but not overly offensive. So 25, Psycho 4. Number 25 is going to be Leatherface. Now, a lot of people did not like this one, but I kind of got a kick out of it. Like, for all of the reboots and going back to the beginning and all that shit that we get numerous times in this franchise, this one, to me, at least tried to do something a little different. It tried to do a little bit of a whodunit angle to where you're presented with these characters escaping from this asylum and you have to kind of figure out throughout the film which one's going to end up being Leatherface. Now, the mystery itself, I don't think was completely successful because to me, the obvious pick for who would have been Leatherface was clearly a red herring. So I kind of, by process of elimination, knew who the guy was going to be by the end, but the journey you go along, it's just like a road, Devil's Rejects type movie with a lot of gore, not the most pleasant people. If you're not into that, then you're not into this franchise anyway, so you're not even watching it, but decent enough time. I like some of where the story ends up at the end. I like some of the prequel side of things where you get to see characters like the Hitchhiker and Chop Top and the Cook whenever they're younger, and you can kind of pick it out if you're a fan of the franchise. So I had a decent enough time with it. It wasn't offensive to me. I could actually watch this and then watch the original 1974 movie, and I think that they might bleed together pretty decently. So had a good enough time with it. 24. Number 23 is going to be Scream 3. Now, for the worst, clearly, of that franchise, not too shabby. Scream 3 is actually halfway decent. Got some pretty cool story twists in there. It might be jumping the shark a little bit, but it's a nice little mystery. You know, they introduce the whole thing like with the rules about they're gonna change something that we thought we knew, and they do some interesting things with that. The whole setting of putting it like ultra meta to where the kills are actually happening on the Stab set, which is modeled after the Scream set, you know, might be a little too far, but it's kind of fun in its own way. The actors and the characters is where this movie really starts to falter because they're not nearly as interesting and not nearly as well acted as the other movies, and they're kind of like caricatures modeled after the original characters, so they almost seem like a joke in and of themselves, and it doesn't necessarily work the whole way. Killer reveal, pretty cool. Some of the kills, pretty cool. The opening, probably the weakest of the four films, so not an offensive Scream movie whatsoever. If Scream 3 remains the worst Scream film that we ever get, That's not bad for a horror franchise, let's be honest. 23 is Scream 3. 22 is the first hot button that I'm gonna have where everybody's gonna get pissed off at me, and that is Evil Dead 2. If you've seen my ranking, if you've seen my review, you know that I did not grow up with the Evil Dead films. And you also know that I actually prefer the Evil Dead films when they kind of pick a stance. Are they going full-on horror or are they going full-on comedy? This one tries to do both, and for me, it doesn't quite land for me personally as much as it does a lot of other horror fans, it seems, because Evil Dead 2 is certainly a favorite. I don't really care for the whole reboot aspect that they went for in the beginning of this. I actually really like Evil Dead, and having to kind of retcon that and get a very shortened Cliff Notes version of that story at the beginning just to get Ash by himself to do a bunch of goofy shit where he's like bouncing up and down with a lamp and everything. It just doesn't quite speak to me. I still have fun with it. Like I said, these are in the decent, good to great movies here, so these are not movies that I'm shitting on anymore. Evil Dead 2, I get the appeal. I like the fact that if I want this experience, there's only one movie that's going to give it to me, and that's Evil Dead 2. I can have fun with it. I like the gore. I like Ash as a character much more in this than I did in the first one, because this is when he fully becomes Ash. It's just the goofy, kind of campy comedicness, the slapstick stuff, just doesn't quite land for me in this one, while strangely it lands pretty well for me in Army of Darkness. Number 21 is Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Beginning, the sequel to the remake. I know this movie has some fans. For me, it has never quite worked 100%. It carries over a lot of the things that I really like from the remake, namely the characters and the actors that portray them. Certainly has a similar tone and a similar directing style. They certainly tried to model the way that that remake was shot, which I'm a big fan of. To me, this one though, it abandons a lot of what worked as far as tension and as far as dread in that remake, and just kind of replaces it with more gore. This is probably one of the goriest of the Texas Chainsaw films. I mean, you literally see a guy's face actually be carved off. You see him get chainsawed in half into a table. The dude gets lifted up on a chainsaw. It's much more in your face, bloody and gory and, you know, gut filled. The Carnage Candy level is much higher on the beginning, but you know, I don't really care for that being traded off for story and for tone and for dread, because that's one of the things that really hit me a lot with the remake. So this one, I still have fun with it. I like the story. I like some of the characters and the bikers that come in, and the whole thing with the draft, and you know, the draft dodger brother, and then the good soldier brother, and how that kind of changes throughout the movie, and the whole thing with seeing the origin of some of what this family had to do and what caused them to become the Hewitt family that we found later on in the remake. I talk about this a lot when I say I don't really care for prequels, because they answer questions I wasn't asking, or they go way too far with making sure they line up every little tiny detail that didn't necessarily need to be lined up. They kind of commit that sin in this one too, where every little thing you saw in the remake, where the sheriff didn't have teeth, or the one guy was in the wheelchair, and little tiny details, they have to show how the guy lost his teeth. They have to show how he lost his legs, and it's just, it feels easily written. Like you could just watch the remake and go, okay, that's a plot point, there's a plot point, there's a plot point, and just, you could have done more with it. So I still enjoy this. I dig it enough. I have a good enough time with it, but as a follow-up to the remake, I definitely think it's an inferior film. Next up is the next hot button that's gonna get me into trouble, and number 20 is going to be the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now, I rated this much higher when I originally ranked these movies after I got done reviewing them. This is one of those movies that I have a different experience with every time that I rewatch it. Sometimes I can watch it and I totally get into the appreciation of the inspiration that it brought to the genre and how much of a landmark film that it is. And the next time that I watch it, it just doesn't quite land for me because of the dated aspect, and because of, you know, it's more about just living in misery for 90 minutes. And I felt somewhere in the middle of that upon this most recent rewatch. So, not taking anything away from this movie. I know that it's a landmark horror film. I know some people call it one of the best ever, one of their favorites ever. Totally respect that. Did not grow up watching this one. I didn't even see this until after the remake, and I didn't actually watch it to kind of critique it until about 2 years ago. So I've only seen it a handful of times. It's one of those movies that I appreciate more than I actually enjoy. Number 19 for me is going to be Psycho 3. Now, this is the first time in the Psycho franchise that you kind of get the more generic standard slasher fare out of Norman Bates. The first two movies, much higher quality. You'll see them much higher on this list, obviously. Psycho 3, this is the one that's directed by Anthony Perkins. It kind of tries to model itself tone and direction-wise after Psycho 2, where you have Anthony Perkins back 20-something years later. Now he's kind of back under the control of Mother. You have this introduction of this nun where she's suicidal and she's lost her faith and she caused the death of another nun, and they kind of meet together. You got the introduction of this other really weird dude that doesn't want you to touch his guitar, that starts running the motel and starts to kind of blackmail Norman to a bit. There's a lot of moving pieces to this movie, and it's interesting enough to watch. It's still fun. It's still pretty high quality for a third movie in a slasher franchise, and I really dig the third act when you actually get to see Norman like dressed as mother and doing the voice, and some of the direction when he's in shadows and he's like moving pictures back and everything. All that stuff is great. And some of the kills are pretty cool too. But to me, the story, all the moving pieces, is where this movie fails the most because none of it really pays off. The weird guy never really goes anywhere. He gets killed with a guitar. Okay, whatever. Never really amounted to anything. The whole nun thing goes absolutely nowhere. Could have been very interesting to see where these two characters, Norman and this nun, and their psychology kind of mesh together, or they either become the perfect couple or the absolute worst mix whatsoever, and how that would have exploded. Goes nowhere. It's a good enough sequel that to me just does not stick the landing story-wise. Number 18 is going to be Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. Now this is absolutely 100% a love it or hate it movie in this franchise.
Hey, lick my plate, you dog dick!
It has a wildly different tone than the first movie, no matter what Tobe Hooper says he was intending with the first movie. This is a very slapsticky, comedic style sequel to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's a lot gorier, it's a lot more in your face, it's a lot more animated, and you either have fun with that or you detest it. I personally have a little bit more fun and can rewatch this one a lot more than I can the original, so I prefer it just by a razor's edge. You got Chop Top as a character that's very memorable. The Leatherface performance isn't nearly as good in this one, I will say that. It's a little bit more off-putting than the first film where it was genuinely kind of terrifying, but where the story goes, the whole thing was stretched, the whole angle with Dennis Hopper kind of coming back for revenge and tying into the first movie, I have a good enough time with this one. It gets a little bit annoying towards the end to where how long and drawn out some of the story is. Stretch just being maniacal and screaming through most of the movie gets a little bit tiresome. Some of the things that, like physicality, whenever like Leatherface literally gets a chainsaw shoved all the way through him, yet he returns in the next movie, and things like that hold it back a little bit, but it's still a decent enough Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie with a lot more fun added into it to where I actually enjoy it more than some of the other ones. Number 17 is going to be Curse of Chucky. Now this was a huge step up from Seed of Chucky, and I actually was genuinely surprised how much that I really liked this when it first came out. It was the first one to hit VOD, and it was the same director and writer, Don Mancini, who did Seed, so I was like, oh my god, this is going to be the worst thing ever. And you watch it, and he actually made a very smart choice to take it back to its roots. It's more horror slasher than kind of meta comedy. It's got a lot more of that in the shadows POV style like the original film did. Chucky is much more of his old self again, has some really cool demented one-liners. The kills are awesome, the gore is awesome. The main character of Nika, played by Brad Dourif's daughter, Fiona Dourif, which was another red flag. I thought, oh god, they're just putting his daughter in here because she's Brad Dourif's daughter, she's gonna be terrible. And she's great, she's one of the better characters in this franchise. Where this movie dips down a bit for me is that Don Mancini's direction I still don't think is quite as strong in this one as it could be. I think that some of the way that they tried to make Bride and Seed part of the canon in this doesn't quite mesh for me. Like, they were doing just fine at having like this kind of standalone story that you could place in the timeline, and then there's little twists and turns that show that Jennifer Tilly is still here and this takes place after Seed and everything still works, and it just kind of makes you go, oh, just admit that that's a terrible movie. Quit trying to make it work. Beyond that, it's just an enjoyable Chucky movie. It's cool, haunted house, kind of Hitchcockian feel to it. Not nearly as beloved for me as some of the Chucky movies that are going to be higher on this list, not only just because of age, and I didn't grow up with them, just because of including the Seed shit. But I enjoy this one quite a bit. I actually really wish that he would have stuck the landing with Cult and kind of continued this trend that he started with Curse, because we would have been on a much higher upswing than we are right now with the Chucky franchise. Number 16 is The Evil Dead, the original Evil Dead. Now, this is a movie that, just like the original Texas Chainsaw, I kind of have a different experience every single time that I watch it. When I first saw it, didn't really like it. When I watched it later on in life, actually really enjoyed it for what it was. Then I rewatched it again, thought it was dated as fuck. Now I rewatched it in preparation for my review series and my ranking and this obviously, and I really enjoyed it again. I dug what it brought. I kind of viewed it as a movie, as a product of its time, as an independent film, as a first-time filmmaker, and I see a lot of the creativity in this movie when I kind of look at it through that lens. The characters here, not really all that strong, but they're good enough for what the movie creates. I like the practical effects and the makeup effects and the gore effects in this. Some really cool camera work, some of the overhead shots, some of the sound design whenever like Ash is clicking chains together. The whole thing with the camera moving through the woods, like following the evil is really cool. Beyond that, it's a movie that's not very strong story-wise, but if you want some nice, gory, blood-soaked entertainment, the original The Evil Dead, at least as of the filming of this ranking, I can enjoy it, and I actually dig it for what it brought to the genre. Number 15, we're in the top half now, home stretch, baby, and number 15 is going to be the Child's Play 2019 remake. Really dug this movie, had a great time with it. I've seen it 3 times now, and it's gotten slightly better upon every single rewatch. Had very high hopes for it and very high worries for it, but if you've seen my review and my previous rankings earlier this year, I really dug what they brought to this. I was a big advocate for this film. I was not one of the hashtag Team Mancini sheep that just don't want anything new brought to this franchise. I actually like the fact that if they were going to do a remake, they were going to do it right, in a sense that they don't try to carbon copy what came before. They took a very different and a very huge risk on what they were doing with this, making Chucky an AI instead of a possessed doll, making him and Andy's friendship the core of the movie, making Chucky almost like a misunderstood character and not so much a villain. These are all huge risks that for me personally, not for everybody, but for me personally, really paid off in this movie, and I dug every aspect that they brought to it. I love the kills, some of the best kills of the franchise. I will say that definitively. I think one of them was like top 5 when I did my ranking. I like the story. I think it was directed very well. I actually liked some of the comedy they brought to it. I just got done talking about Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. There was a very cool kill and plot point of the movie that was taken right from that to me was a great little callback. Where the movie dips down for me is that the design of the doll is trash. I could still watch the movie and get past it very quickly, but I will admit that fully. They should have done much better work on that doll. I don't really care for the neighbor, the Detective Mike, how they utilized him. Like him as a character, don't think he was a very good cop. And I don't really like Andy's friends. To me, I thought they were annoying. But beyond that, pretty damn good Child's Play movie. Really unfairly bashed. Should have been a lot more successful, but people just don't want anything remake-wise. They don't see the potential in there. They just want to stick with what Mancini will give them, which as of late has not been very good. So Child's Play 2019, I was a big fan of it for me. Number 15. Number 14 is going to be Scream 2. Very good sequel to the first Scream. Came out like a year later too, so that's kind of one of the Friday the 13th formula. We just do one every year. But this movie did pretty damn good of kind of following the formula of the first film.
The first Terminator is historical. Yeah. Sarah Connor. Yes.
Kind of poking fun at the fact that it was following the formula of the first film. The kills, to me, are decent. They're not, none of the kills in the Scream franchise are all that impressive to me, but they do a decent enough job of trying to ramp it up a little bit for the sequel. There's certain characters in the second one that I actually enjoy more than the first one. I like Sydney. She's probably my favorite final girl. I'm not a Scream fanatic, but she's just a badass, and this is the first movie where you really get to see how much of a badass chick that she is. I really like the villain reveals at the end. Some people aren't too crazy about them. I love Timothy Olyphant, and I actually really like the actress that plays Billy Loomis's mom, so that whole twist kind of brought in there, to me, was very interesting. I have fun with this one. It's not nearly as iconic as the first one, and it's not nearly as successful in my mind with kind of playing on the genre than one of the Scream films that are going to be above this, but I have a very good time with Scream 2, so here's where it lands. Number 13. Oh boy. Time to give Brian Lomax an aneurysm. Number 13 is the original Alfred Hitchcock Psycho. Hear me out. Like I prefaced this video with, if we were doing these rankings objectively, we would all have the same exact video. There would be no point in even having ranking videos. Subjectively, I did not grow up with this movie. It's definitely dated to me in a certain aspect. I really enjoyed it a lot more upon rewatch right before I just did my review for it a couple of months ago, so I am a fan of this movie. It is high on this list. 13 of 31 is not bad. But it's not top 3, top 5 for me personally, just because it never really had an impact on me personally. I didn't watch this as a young child to where this inspired me to be a filmmaker, or this was like one of the big movies that really inspired me to be a horror fan, or Norman Bates was a character that I just latched onto and just fell in love with. This was a movie that I had to grow to appreciate artistically. I've done that. There's a lot of things about this that I can totally appreciate and love the fact that it brought to the genre, like the way that the camera moved around in certain aspects, like the way that Alfred Hitchcock decided to market this film and shoot this film, and the way that the story plays out, and how it was certainly very shocking for its time, created an icon in Norman Bates. The shower scene, one of the most important scenes in horror history. I dig most of the characters. I actually really like Janet Leigh's character of Marion Crane, and kind of following along with her story to have it quite literally cut short. And the way that it plays out at the end with him being his mother in his head, like, that's all genius stuff. It's just stuff that didn't have a huge impact on me because I watched it so late in life, and because by the time I did watch it, it was kind of pop culture common sense, if that isn't even a term, to where you watch Psycho and you already know all the twists and turns. You're just watching it as kind of like an exploration of art. So really, really like Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, but not one of my favorite horror films of all time. So it's at 13. Number 12 is going to be Scream 4. Now, there seems to be two types of people on this earth. People that prefer Scream 2 or people that prefer Scream 4. I'm obviously in this camp. To me, Scream 4 not only had a little bit better kills because they were certainly a little bit more modern and certainly gorier, but the story to me was much better in this. When they're playing on reboots and remakes that were all the rage at the time, I think the characters in this, they're either second best or they're the best of the entire franchise. Like where you have Danielle Panabaker's Kirby, which is one of the best characters of this franchise. I even love Kieran Culkin's character, who's kind of like the movie nerd, but a little bit of coolness to him. Sydney kind of coming back is very cool. She's still a badass. The whole twist with Jill and that whole reveal was just out of this world insane. Where this movie falters a little bit and why it's not much higher on this list is the fact that I think that it's a damn shame that all three of the original cast members survived this movie. I think this was the movie to kill one or two of them, and it would have made a huge impact. To me, wasted potential there. And beyond that, the movie does go on a bit too long as far as the final act. Like once you have the twist reveals and everything, they kind of kept it safe with how they decided to keep certain characters alive and stretch out that final act to make that happen. So I really dig Scream 4. I have a blast with it. It has a little bit of a weird quality to it too. Like the way that Wes Craven decided to shoot it has a strange little quality. That's another small negative, but that's something that only like film geeks would see. Beyond that, really dig Scream 4 as a horror sequel, and to me, it is the second best Scream film. Number 11 is Army of Darkness. Now, this is the only Evil Dead film that I have nostalgia for, and if you heard my little spiel in my review, I didn't even know at the time that I had nostalgia for it, because it was a movie I used to watch as a kid on a VHS tape that I never remembered the title to, lost that VHS tape, and then watched Army of Darkness like a decade or so plus later, and I was like, holy shit, this is that movie I used to watch as a kid. For whatever reason, the slapstick comedy that does not work for me in Evil Dead 2 works for me here. I actually genuinely laugh out loud at Army of Darkness. I think that it's a very fun movie. I enjoy the character of Ash and the crazy shenanigans that he gets into. I dig the practical effects and the stop motion effects with the skeletons and the actual Army of Darkness. The whole medieval setting is very cool to me. It's just a blast of a movie. Where it falls a little bit lower in this list is the lack of gore, which stands out a lot in the Evil Dead franchise. If you do not have buckets and buckets and buckets of blood, and there's like none in this movie. There's like one little geyser shot of blood coming out of a little rancor, whatever the fuck you want to call it, pit. That's about it. And it certainly is a little too goofy at times. There is still points in this where it's a little bit past the slapstick threshold that I have, but I still have a blast with Army of Darkness. Number 10 for me is Child's Play 3.
Don't fuck with the Chuck.
Now, this might be one that gets me in trouble too, because a lot of people do not like this sequel. This was the horror movie that turned me into a horror fan. This was the first horror film that I ever saw. I've told this story ad nauseum, but I'm gonna tell it again so that you understand why it's so high. This is the reason why I'm in front of you talking right now, is Child's Play 3. Came home, my dad was watching it on a VHS tape, I sat down, watched it, instantly a Chucky fan. It was my gateway drug into Freddy, which probably became my favorite slasher franchise, but they're very close. And that's the reason why I'm here in front of you. That's the reason why I'm a movie and a horror fanatic, is because of Child's Play 3. And I actually think that the movie, removing all of that from it, is a lot better than people give it credit for. I think that it's a blast. I think Chucky is at some of his most fun in this, has some of his best kills, some of his best one-liners, and a lot of the approach of this movie is modeled after Child's Play 2, and to me, in most of the movie, is almost as good as Child's Play 2, but people use that as a negative against it just because Child's Play 2 got there first. But to me, it's just more great Chucky shit. So I really dig this. I like the military setting. I don't mind the older Andy, that whole new dynamic with it, even though Tyler's a little bit annoying. I like the whole aspect with the carnival at the end, badass third act. Is there some cheesy moments? Sure. Is some of the production quality and the directing and everything as good as the first couple of movies or even a couple of the sequels? No, maybe not so much. But to me, it is a blast of a movie. It has a huge place in my heart and a place of my history of a horror fan. It's a very important movie for me personally, and I genuinely do, and I'm not ashamed to say this, go back and forth between this and the original film almost every single time that I rewatch them. I'm on which one that I actually enjoy more. Rewatchable wise, I think I probably rewatched Child's Play 3 a bit more, even though obviously the original is a little bit higher on this list as of this time. But I'm telling you, that is how much of a razor thin edge it is between those two films for me. I love Child's Play 3. Number 9 is going to be The Collection. Yes, you probably forgot about these movies because I haven't even talked about them yet, and both of them are this high on this list. Number 9 for The Collection is a fair spot for me because this is a badass horror sequel. This is a movie that I expected very little from because it came out very quietly, even though I really liked The Collector. Obviously that's a little higher. I walked into this expecting it to be an inferior film because it felt like it just floated under the radar. It felt like nobody knew about it. I was in a theater of maybe 2 other people that saw it. And this definitely takes the Terminator 2 approach to sequels. It's bigger, it's badder, it's got more entertainment value, it's got a little bit more excitement, a lot more gunplay and explosions and everything. It kind of goes the more horror action route to a certain degree, while not losing a single drip of dementedness of that first film. It is still gory as all hell. It opens up with a gigantic massacre where these fucking thresher blades come through in this trap in this nightclub and just mow down a couple of hundred people. That's how the movie begins. Then you get into this little wild ass haunted house at the Collector's, like, his lair, this abandoned hotel. You get Arkin, a return of a great character who is like even more of a strong character in this as far as physicality, and he comes through and he's leading these mercenaries to try to take down the Collector. And all the traps that he have in here, all like the slaves that he has, where he's like tortured these people to death almost to where they're tortured into some kind of a weird Stockholm syndrome for him. And just the way this movie plays out is just madness. It's an absolute blast for me, and it's got one of my favorite horror movie endings of all time. It's very ballsy to me. So I really enjoy The Collection. It is this high on this list at number 9. Number 8 is going to be Psycho 2, my favorite of the Psycho films. And this is one where this is a sequel done the way a sequel should be done. This is a sequel 20-something years after a proven classic. And that is usually a recipe for instant disaster, not only critically but fan-wise, where you put out a film so later on and they're like, why are you touching Psycho? And you get to Psycho 2 and you're like, holy shit, you actually have a great story and a great script by Tom Holland that merits its existence and actually stacks it up quality-wise with the original to where you will find a lot of people, myself included, that prefer Psycho 2 to Psycho. Even Brian Lomax, who is a Psycho fanatic, says that he struggles sometimes with how great Psycho 1 and Psycho 2 are. I'm sure he'll always have the first one a little bit above it, but it's that close for even the cinephiles. And you get to Psycho 2, and there's great kills. It's a lot more slasher-centric, a lot more modern slasher, I guess I should say, because the first one's definitely a slasher, but one of the better kills of the franchise with a knife through the face, the whole aspect of the sister of Marion Crane kind of being like this manipulator behind the scenes trying to bring Norman back down into madness. You got Meg Tilly in a really great role. It's just a fantastic movie. It really is. It's one of the best horror sequels that have out there. And if you're somebody that has always been scared away from it because you view Psycho as this classic and you don't even want to see anybody try to touch that storyline, give Psycho 2 a shot because it's worth it. Number 7 is the original Child's Play. Now, like I said, this one is a razor thin difference between Child's Play and Child's Play 3, so you ask me tomorrow, they might swap places, but Child's Play is just, it's another proven classic. This is written and directed by Tom Holland. Well, written by Don Mancini, adjusted quite a bit by Tom Holland, and then directed by Tom Holland. A lot of the more iconic pieces of the Child's Play story is stuff that Tom Holland added to this story, so I give him a little bit more credit sometimes for this original film. But you got the origin of Chucky. You've got the beginning of one of my favorite slasher franchises of all time. You've got great kills. You got Brad Dourif just nailing it right out of the gate with his voice work and the lines written for Chucky.
I said talk to me, damn it, or else I'm gonna throw you in the fire!
You stupid bitch, you filthy slut! Did you fuck with me?
Some really great direction with the POV shots and the whole mystery of, is Chucky doing this or is Andy doing this? And it's just a classic. It's an absolute 80s classic. It's a slasher classic. For me, why it's not my favorite Child's Play film and why it's not in my top 5 or my top 3 is because there are some effects in this movie that are certainly dated more than a lot of the other sequels. Like, they put a little person in a suit in a couple of scenes that really stands out to me in this one. It's maybe held back a little bit for me fun-wise because while Chucky is awesome in this one, they still had not quite realized what they had in the character of Chucky. So once you get to Chucky 2 and onward, they fully realize that Chucky is the star of the show and he's much more like animated, much more bombastic with how fun that he is. So to me, I kind of gravitate a little bit more towards those than I do this one, but this is still one of my favorite horror films of all time, sitting comfortably right here. Child's Play. Number 6 is going to be Scream, my favorite of the Scream franchise. Now, this is another one that I've had a complicated history with. I actually did not like Scream when it first came out, and I feel like I was one of the only ones. I was one of those kids that was a horror fan from a very young age, like 3 or 4 years old. You can have your opinions about that, but whatever. I was a very young horror fan. I was very experienced in horror. I had seen pretty much all the Freddys, all the Chuckies, a lot of the Michael Myers movies, things like The Thing and Exorcist, and I was the horror fan in my generation. Nobody else, kid-wise, that I knew liked horror movies, had experience with horror movies, was allowed to watch horror movies. And then Scream came out and that changed like this. All of a sudden Scream came out and everybody that I knew was suddenly a horror fan because they saw Scream, and it drove me nuts. I was like, you're all fucking fakes. You're all posers. You just like this ghost face shit and I'm the real horror fan. It sounds silly, but it's a fun story. Obviously, you fast forward a couple of decades and I've rewatched Scream quite a few times since then, and the rest of the movies as well, obviously. And I've grown to like it a lot for what it actually is, and I've gotten rid of all that weird baggage that I had as a kid. But when I initially saw it, was not a fan of this one, so that kind of takes it down a bit for not being one of those beloved movies from my childhood. But as an adult, it's a great series. It's a very smart series. I could see why, especially importance-wise, this kind of gave the shot in the arm that the horror, especially slasher genre, needed at the time when horror was in a bit of a rut. It's a very smart movie. It's fun to watch as a slasher fanatic where you see all the winks and the nods and, you know, all of the little tropes and the cliches turned on their head. Ghostface is a very iconic killer, even though he's different every single movie. The characters are great. Like I've said, Sidney Prescott might be my favorite final girl because she's just a badass character. The whole twists and reveals in the third act with there being 2 killers and the identity and the motives of those killers. It's a fun movie. The kills is what holds it back for me a little bit. The Scream franchise has never been very inventive to me with kills. The ones that you could call inventive to me are very stupid, like the whole garage door kill where that fucking garage door would never lift her more than an inch off the ground. Stuff like that drives me a little bit nuts when I watch it, but overall, obviously it's very high on this list. This is a badass slasher movie, and it is my favorite of the Scream movies. Top 5, baby. Here we are. These are the crown jewels of this list. Number 5 for me, and this was a tough choice between number 5 and number 4, is Bride of Chucky. At one point, this was my favorite Child's Play film, and sometimes I rewatch it and it might become my favorite one again, assuming that they don't have a better one come out in the future. But Bride of Chucky, to me, I have a blast with. To me, this is when they got the mix perfect that they went way too far with Seed, where you had the slasher and the horror and the tension, but you had comedy in there, and you had a little bit of meta-ness in there, and you had a little bit of creativity in the writing to where it all fit, it all made sense. It was all the right amounts dialed in at the right times, and I have an absolute blast with this movie every single time that I watch it. I think Chucky and Tiffany are great from the very beginning, even when she's Jennifer Tilly, like, you know, the human version, but when she's a doll, it's even more entertaining. The kills are great and inventive in this, some of my favorite of the franchise. I really dig the characters throughout. Yes, Jesse and Jade aren't necessarily like horror cinema classics, but they have a nice little dichotomy with Chucky and Tiffany. To me, the story-wise, those characters work in kind of propelling forward, and we're just watching it for Chucky and Tiffany anyway, let's be honest, so what the hell does it matter? But where this movie doesn't quite make my favorite anymore, and why it's at number 5 and not like number 2, is because to me the third act does peter out a little bit as far as where they decide to end things. It's still a lot of fun. It's still a blast of a movie. It's still an absolute riot. I laugh out loud almost every single time that I watch it, and I think Ronnie, you, both movies, Freddy vs. Jason and this one, are those types of films that I just have a blast with, but just doesn't quite, by a razor's edge, stick the landing as well as certainly the last Chucky movie that I had to talk about and some of the movies that I have left on this list. Number 4, the dark horse probably of this ranking, and that is The Collector. This movie is badass. This is a movie that I loved from the very first time that I saw it in theaters. I have sung its praises ever since. I begged and pleaded for a sequel and got it in a very badass sequel, The Collection, and I have begged and pleaded for a third film, and we're going to be getting that hopefully at some point next year in The Collected. This is just a very underappreciated, kick-ass, horror icon-filled slasher / torture movie. I'll say both because I know people get picky when you say slasher film. This is not a slasher, it didn't have a hockey mask. But you get The Collector, and this is a very iconic villain that is brutal and demented and terrifying in a very simple design. You get a great protagonist in Arkin that you totally identify with, root for, and like the story-wise and the motivation that gets him into this situation. You want to see him prevail. You like seeing his heart and his kind of morals grow throughout the movie, or at least get shown throughout the movie, where he has to go back and try to save this family while trying to save his own and trying to save his own ass. The traps are gnarly as hell. The kills, the gore, the grimy, grounded take that they go for this, and the tone. This is just a kick-ass movie. A little bit implausible with the traps. A couple other small little nitpicky things here and there, like the grain that they decided to use when they shot it. But other than that, this is one of my favorite horror films. So sitting tidy right here at number 4. Now we're at the top 3, and going away with the bronze medal, number 3 is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake. Now, I know people have very passionate views both for and against this. I will preface this entire commentary of this movie by saying, me, at the age that I was, with not having seen quite the amount of horror films that I've seen now, when I went to see this remake in the theater, until then and since then, this was my scariest theater experience of my entire life. This was something that was unlike anything else that I had ever seen as far as what they decided to deliver, with how demented and how, macabre and how morbid some of the things were with this movie. I thought Leatherface was intimidating and scary as hell, and just physically intimidating, and just presence-wise was intimidating. I think even more than that is the morbid sense of R. Lee Ermey and his character, which really got under my skin. I really enjoy all of the protagonists that we get in this, and they're all acted very well. It's a very well shot and well directed movie. To me, it does a very good job at holding on to some of the things that are very important about that original Texas Chainsaw movie and making it modern, making it a little bit different, expanding certain things, kind of putting certain things in the background, just doing a little bit different approach to it. This is one of my favorite remakes. This is one of my favorite horror films. There are some flaws, like I don't really think that storytelling-wise, the way that they decide to go with the Jessica Biel character, where she's just continuously making the dumbest decisions over and over, is the best thing in the world. Sometimes it actually annoys me when I watch it, how much she runs and then stops at the very first point, and it's like, have you not gotten the clue yet that every motherfucker you run into is part of this family somehow? Things like that. It doesn't go, it might be a little bit tame by modern standards as far as the gore, because to me, they didn't really try to make the gore the reason why you were scared. It was more the characters, which to me is why this works better than the beginning. So if you're a gore hound, this might be a little bit tame. And it's not nearly as grindhouse or as like mentally fucked as the first movie. So if you appreciate it for that, this is much more a modern slasher style to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But for me personally, that works much better. And this is not only my favorite Texas Chainsaw film, but number 3 on 31 on 31. Top 2. And I'm sure the one that ends up being my number one was probably obvious, so I'm not gonna kick around the bush much longer. Number two is going to be Evil Dead. Now, this movie is another one on this list that I've had a complicated relationship with because I was not a big fan of Evil Dead in general, with the exception of Army of Darkness whenever I went to go see it in theaters. This movie was very overhyped, not only with the marketing, but with people's like review quotes that they put on posters and shit. Like, the most terrifying film you'll ever see, I think was like one of the big taglines of the poster. It was like the whole fucking poster. So I was expecting this movie to be terrifying. I was expecting this to be scary and you know, something that was gonna disturb me. And it didn't do that, and so I really disliked it when I first saw it. Waited a year, maybe even two, before I rewatched it again at home, and instantly fell in love with it. This is one of the very few times, like maybe 3 tops in my entire life, that I have swung so much on my opinion on a movie. I'm not somebody that does that very often at all. And this is one of those times where I'm glad it happened, because the Evil Dead remake is fucking bad ass. This is metal as hell for a horror film. This takes everything that I like about Evil Dead and ramps it up to fucking 11. There's blood and gore and carnage candy everywhere in Evil Dead. There's a little bit of slapstick-ish to it with how far they go with the gore, but it is not a comedic film. It is a very straightforward horror film, which I prefer. I love the storyline of it with having Mia and this drug abuse, and they're trying to basically detox her in this isolated cabin, and she's so going nuts because of all the things that she's seen, like the shit in the woods with the tree and the dead bitch, and she's being honest, but they don't believe her and they don't want to help her because they think she's just trying to say shit to get out of it, or she's having a whacked out kind of response to the withdrawals. It's a very cool, creative writing to put them in this setting and to keep them there. The practical effects in this gore, top notch. The whole third act with the rain and blood sequence and the chick that comes out of the ground and the chainsaw effects and everything. This is just a gore hound's dream of a movie. And for somebody that did not grow up with the Evil Dead films, that does not have that nostalgia lock for some of those movies to where they would be much higher on this list if they were, this is my favorite Evil Dead film. And number one, the top dog, the gold star winner of 31 on 31, one of my favorite horror films of all time by a landslide. And it's probably obvious.
I hate kids.
Child's Play 2. This is my favorite Chucky movie. This is one of my favorite slasher films. This is one of my favorite sequels, period. This is just one of those sequels, like The Collection, that takes that Terminator 2 approach where this one tries to do everything bigger and badder and better and more entertaining than the first one. And almost without exception, for me personally, it succeeds. Chucky is at his absolute best in this movie as a character. His one-liners, all of them are instantly classic and iconic. The kills are great. That laugh, I mean, Chucky is the star of the show in Child's Play 2, and they damn near squeeze every bit of juice out of that concept that they can. Andy, Alex Vincent, his performance as Andy is much better in this one, and I think that he's much more enjoyable, and because he's a little older, it is a little bit more dramatic, a little bit more tension between those two, whereas in the first one, the kid's not really that much of a threat and wasn't that great of an actor, if we can be honest. The third act of this movie, one of the greatest third acts in any horror movie ever. The whole toy store or toy factory where you have all the good guy dolls and it's like a maze. It's almost like the Shining Hedge maze of just boxes and all the factory machinery that's going on, and you get some great kills inside of there where the dude gets his eyes pushed in, and the way that they dismember Chucky slowly throughout this third act, I mean, I love the way that he dies in part 3. That's probably my favorite Chucky death and all the practical effects with that, but I love the end of Chucky in this one where he gets limbs taken off and he loses his hand. He does like the Evil Dead 2 thing where he sticks a knife in there. I fucking hate kids. And he gets stuck in the machine and gets a bunch of doll parts pushed into him, and now he's attached to a little board with some wheels, and he's still coming at him with everything that he's got. And then he gets covered in molten plastic and still coming at him, and they shove a thing inside of his mouth and blow him up. I mean, he's just relentless in this after he finds out that he can't get out of his body anymore. It's just, God, I love this movie so much. This is, if I had to do, which I probably will have to do eventually, like top 20 movies of all time, I would be shocked if Child's Play 2 does not make it on that list, because I love Child's Play 2. And it's my number 1. Well, there it is, guys. I hope the wait was well worth it. I hope you're not too angry at me for some of my placements. But like I said, this is just my list. These are my experiences, the subjectivity of film, kind of how it's placed on me with all 31 of these movies. Please place your list down below. Maybe give me some reasons. If you don't want to do all 31, maybe just do the top 10 if you want to. But let me know your ranking down below. And be sure to check out Brian Lomack's Movie Talk and Willis Greedia to check out their lists. I'm telling you, all 3 of them are very different for very different reasons. So you kind of get your own flavor. Which one tastes more like you, Cody, Brian, or CP? That came out horribly wrong, but it's staying in the videos. Check down the video description below for the links to their videos. Maybe even give us some suggestions down below for stuff that we want to do next year on 31 on 31. We've already got some ideas brewing, but you know, you might be able to throw an idea out there that we didn't think of, and we're going to go, that is definitely going on next year. So let me know down below what you guys think of this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. It's been a blast this year leading up to 31 on 31 with all the trailers and the marketing that we've been doing. We're going to keep doing that and making this a big yearly event for us. So it's been a blast. Thank you for joining me. Please like and share this video. Hit that subscribe button if you are not already a subscriber. If you want to check down below in the video description on top of the links below for their videos, you're going to find social media links for me like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and my Patreon page, which is a great way to give back to this channel and help this channel grow while getting cool exclusive content for your eyes only. And my Teespring store just below that. If you scroll down, I've got all of my merchandise designs. You've got this one right here, a couple more 31 on 31 designs. I got my Autop Stream logo down there, a couple of more like Chucky-centric logos. I'm a Chucky fanatic, guys. You should know this by now. And if you want to check out some more of my videos, including past rankings for all of these franchises, reviews for every single movie that I've talked about below, or even some of the other franchises that I've done, there is a ton of content on this channel, and you can check all of that out by clicking right over here.